Here's the kicker. The house had a squatter in it. It had somebody living around the back in the basement. And the squatter, here was the problem. The squatter was a big dude, right? I'm talking 6'3", 6'4", big old man squatting in the basement. In this video, I want to walk you through exactly how I built passive income by buying rental properties from scratch, from nothing, step by step. And the reason is because you can do it too. It's an investment that's available for all of us. So let me explain a few things. By the time I was 30 years old, I had personally had 20 different addresses. I lived in 20 different places. Most of them were apartments and duplexes. See, my parents, they never owned a home. And I didn't know a lot about home ownership, right? When I grew up and where I grew up, everybody wasn't homeowners where I was. So owning real estate, that was something that other people did on TV or in other areas of the city or far out in the suburbs or something, right? But here's the wild part that I want to try to talk to you guys about here. It's the fact that by the end of the year 2000, when I was 30 years old, I owned 2 houses, 2 pieces of property. One I lived in and the other one I rented out. And I started with no money. But here's the more important thing. Yes, it worked in the year 2000, but it's still working for a lot of people today. Now, hey, I grew up poor, right? And so because we moved so much, something like stability in a house or a piece of property was foreign to me. But something changed in my late 20s. I started watching those old school infomercial. You might remember them if you're about my age, but you know, the Carlton sheets and all that type of stuff where they would come on at night, late at night, midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning or even later sometime. They would come on and they'd be like these 15 or 30-minute infomercials explaining how, you know, you can buy real estate too with no money down. And the guy would be sitting on his yacht with his family around him and all this good stuff. I started watching those things and paying close attention, and I kind of got latched on to them. And those infomercials, back then we called them infomercials, those things kind of sparked something in me. And I started thinking about, hey, maybe I can do that too. I could own some property. I wasn't really focused on the no money down. I was just focused on owning the property, right? But let me be clear about this so you don't get this misconstrued. I was nervous. I was scared. I had no idea what I was doing. It was brand new territory for me, but I just knew what I wanted. And ultimately, I knew that if there was a will, there was a way. Lo and behold, I had the will, and that forged the path for a way. Again, I knew nothing about home ownership, besides the fact that I did have one sister who had bought a home. But besides her, I had never seen what home ownership looked like. So I took a leap. In 1999, I met a local handyman. His name was Wes. And he was a scruffy guy, you know, all messed up. I think he came to an apartment that I was living in 1999, and he was local. I began to ask him questions, got his card, and lo and behold, I called him up and I asked him, could I trail him? Because I want to learn about real estate. I want to learn about how to fix houses and stuff. So I asked him, can I trail you on the weekends? He said, cool. I said, you don't even have to pay me. I just want to learn. So I sort of put down the whole kicking it and hanging out and doing, you know, going to my buddy's house and relaxing, doing nothing, put that to the side. And I got a little focused on learning. And I started shadowing him for free on the weekends. I learned drywall, how to put up drywall, cut and put it up. I learned a little bit about electrical. I learned a little bit about plumbing. I learned how to put up a ceiling, a little bit about painting, a little bit about floors. I just learned a little bit, just a little bit, to get me started on this process of maybe buying a house. At this time, I didn't have a house. All it cost me was some time and some effort and some sacrificing. But I had to do it, and I did it for free. I didn't want to be paid because I knew that ultimately the pay was going to be in the knowledge that I gained, not necessarily the money. So then in 2000, I started actually going out and looking for homes. And lo and behold, I needed to find a realtor, right? So I opened up the yellow pages, true story, opened up the yellow pages and looked for somebody. And I landed on a guy who actually was a real estate agent, plus he owned some rental property. You know, back then the yellow pages was our equivalent to today's Google, right? That was how we searched for things, businesses. We just flipped pages, right? So ultimately I had this realtor helping me out looking for properties. And one time, after about a month or two of looking for properties, he said, hey, I got some property I'm looking to get rid of. Would you be interested in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath? I said, yeah, let me check it out. So lo and behold, I didn't know what I was looking at. I didn't know what I was trying to find and see. I didn't even really know the part of town very well, but I went to the part of town. It was the worst part of town, and he ended up selling me one of his properties, and he owner financed it. He sold that 2-bedroom, 1-bath in not so great condition in a not so great part of town for $10,000. And I think ultimately I was paying him like $150 a month. He financed it for me and did it on a 10-year note. So that was my first piece of property in the year 2000, right? I'm paying $150 a month and the house needs work. And here's the kicker. The house had a squatter in it. It had somebody living around the back in the basement, no electricity, no utilities, no nothing, just somebody coming to squat there and live there. And the squatter, here was the problem. The squatter was a big dude, right? I'm talking 6'3", 6'4", big old man squatting in the basement, right? Now this house had one of those enormous gravity furnaces that used to sit in the middle of the bottom of the basement, and it had these ginormous white pipes going off of it. The pipes obviously were the ducts, right? But it had and I didn't know what to do with it. And like your gas bills would be like $300 or $400 a month, right? So it had an old gravity furnace. It needed a lot of work repairs in the kitchen and all that stuff. And not to mention it had a squatter. But I went for it. Happy to have my first piece of rental property in a bad part of town. Didn't know what I was doing, but I had to figure it all out. So ultimately, over about a month or so, I got the squatter out, dealing with him, talking to him, working with him. I think I might have even paid him $100 to leave, right? But the squatter ultimately left. And I found a handyman who was working on a piece of property a couple doors down, found him and said, hey, can you help me get this house together? Boom. We got to talking. Lo and behold, he said, yes. I had me a handyman. He had a van. We made some runs to Home Depot back and forth, and I ran into my next big problem. My handyman that I picked up from a couple of doors down just started talking to him because he was working on a house down there. Lo and behold, he ended up stealing about $500 worth of my stuff that I had got from Home Depot, right? Later, I found out that he had been on drugs, right? He had some issues with drugs and all that, but I didn't know that when I found him and first got him. But lo and behold, he ultimately stole my stuff. So I have no money. I have a guy that has stolen some of my stuff, my screen doors and stuff we had bought from Home Depot, and I'm sitting here with this empty house, not knowing what to do, no money, and just trying to figure this thing out, right? I took a few L's early on in this whole process, but I didn't quit. I kept going. There was another handyman working right next door, and I ended up asking him, hey, can you help me out with boom. And lo and behold, Gary helped me out and get that property together and ready to rent out. And that handyman named Gary, I still talk to him and he still works with me today, 25 years later, right? Now, this is all in the year 2000. Meanwhile, I ended up getting married in that year, and also later in the year, my new wife's mother, my mother-in-law, actually gave us her house because she was moving. So she gave us her house, and we got it on one of those old assumption loans, which is a loan where they don't check your background, your credit or nothing. You just assume the loan that's already in place. So we got her house, and her house was probably worth back then about, guys, if you're getting any value from this video, do me a favor, smash the like button, and most of all, share this video with someone who you know could use this valuable information. Also, please drop me a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Now, let's get back to the video. And her house was probably worth back then about $25,000 or $30,000. Small little house, but still a house nonetheless. So I had got married, had a house I lived in, now I owned, and I also had my first rental house all in the year 2000, right? Coming off of 1999, never even owning a house and living in an apartment. So I had a big transition that year in 2000, right? I did it all with basically hustle, grind, faith, and belief that it could be done, because where there was a will to get it done, there was a way. That ultimately happened after some heartbreak, some problems, some issues, some late nights not knowing what I was going to do or what the next move was going to be. And all the while, no real money. So in 2001, I had to take and put together a resume and my goal for the piece of property, I had to shop that around to a dozen different banks before somebody would ultimately take and refinance that loan for me. And ultimately, in 2001, I got that first piece of rental property refinanced on a 30-year note with a bank after we had done the fixing up that needed to be done, right? But here's the deal. Let me keep it real with you guys. Rental property is not passive at first, right? It takes a lot of work to get started, right? It took me a lot of work to get this thing off the ground and going, right? We're talking about passive income, but normally you have to work it really hard before it becomes passive, right? And over time, once you put processes in place and you have systems in place, then it can become more passive, right? You get the right people, the team around you, and that's the type of thing that can help your processes and systems go, and then it becomes passive to you. But it takes a while. Now, between the year 2001 and 2006 or so, I ended up buying 5 more rental properties. I was grinding, I was learning, I was taking lots of chances and taking some risk. Then in around 2008 or so came that housing crash that we had. And it lasted really for several years because 2009, 10, 11, you had all of these foreclosures going on. And around 2012 or 13, I lost some of my rental properties. And I lost them because I had them over leveraged. I hadn't bought them right. I just bought them wrong. When I had all 6 rental properties, I was perpetually, constantly, consistently broke. Yeah, I was making $200 and $300 and maybe $400 per rental property, but whenever I had a major issue that had to happen, because I had no real money, I couldn't afford it. You know, at one point I was bringing home $4,500 a month in rents, $4,500, maybe closer to $5,000 a month. But guess what? My mortgages were close to $3,000 a month. And then if I had one property that was empty and another property needed some major repair, like a water heater went out or something, guess what? Now I ain't making no money in a month because of these major repairs or properties that were empty. And the problem was I had no reserve money to handle emergencies. I had no just in case money. I couldn't build it up. So I juggled these properties for nearly a decade before ultimately I had to let some go. Now, I held on to 2 of those properties that I still own today. Now, all the while, I was managing my own properties as well. Now, I never took on a management company. I always did it myself because I just had a few things and I could do a few things. I'm sort of handy, but I also kept a handyman, a plumber, a HVAC person always on standby. But 25 years later, after I started in the year 2000, today I still own 2 rental properties. Now, that's my story in a nutshell. I didn't start with money. I lost properties because I had no money. And early on, I didn't have the connections, didn't have the right team, and didn't know what I was doing, but I was doing. I just started with curiosity. I started with a will to get it done. I started with some belief and some faith. And ultimately, I had a desire to break this cycle of not owning anything. So for me, my real estate journey was not just about the real estate, it was about the freedom, right? The freedom of ownership. And I had to bump my head a lot over the years. Now, even as we speak today, in a few weeks, I'm gonna make the final payment on one of my properties that I own. And then in about 18 months, I'll make a final payment on that property. So in about 16 to 18 months from now, I'm gonna have both of the rental properties paid off. Now, that's my story, but here's what I want to convey to you on this video. I want to talk to you about why you should consider buying rental properties for passive income and put them in your portfolio. Guys, people have been making thousands of dollars a month from having and owning real estate and rental property for thousands of years. So if you want to build some wealth and build some assets and ownership, you may strongly consider having, buying, owning some real estate, some rental real estate. Let me share some real world numbers with you. 19.3 million. That's the amount of U.S. rental properties there are. And that's counting just single family homes and smaller units. And right now, the average return on investment is 29.6%. on rental properties. And rental prices have surged. In 2024, the average rent was just over $1,300 a month. And that's gone up even this year in 2025. But even last year, that $1,300 per month was like a 31% increase over the previous 5 years. 31%. That's huge. And right now, there are approximately 45 million renter-occupied households in America. That's nearly 31% of all U.S. household units. In other words, 30% of people in America are renting. Now, here's why all of this matters to you as a potential owner of rental real estate. Renting out real estate is not a dying business. It's not going away slowly. Rents keep climbing and going up, and millions and millions and millions of Americans need housing. They need a roof over their head. I guess what I'm saying is, sleeping indoors with a roof over your head, also known as shelter, is not just a fad, right? It's something that we need. It's a human condition that we require. So it's not going away anytime soon. People will always need more and more places to sleep at night. And that's where you come in as an investor, right? You got to realize this. Real estate is not just for the wealthy. Even though you see businesses on a large scale basis buying up pieces of rental property, they're still available to you and me. And if you don't have them in your portfolio, you need to consider adding them to your portfolio. They can become an income producing machine. And I don't want you to miss that opportunity. So that's why I'm having this discussion with you today. Everybody wants to have this passive income. But as I said earlier, it's not always roses up front. You got to put in a lot of work to get it to that point, right? You got to realize that owning rental property is not all, margaritas and checking your mailbox for your rents, right? I want to give you some pros and cons to think about as you consider adding rental real estate to your portfolio, and why really rental real estate could be one of the greatest wealth builders out there if you do it right. Now, what are some pros? Let's talk about it. Obviously, cash flow. You get monthly cash flow coming in, except for the times when your property may be empty, right? We got to realize that does happen. But when your tenants pay rent and your expenses are covered, anything left over is income to you in your pocket, right? We call it cash flow. That's your money to do whatever you want to do with. And if you buy smart, manage it right, and be consistent, that cash flow can be a game changer. Because you could take that cash flow and go pay down debt. You could add to your savings. You could pay off the properties, or you could even invest that money. Now, another pro is appreciation, right? Your property is going to grow in value over time. That's huge. Yeah, you buy the property for $150,000 today. Take a look at it in 10, 15 years. It's going to be worth $250,000. That appreciation matters. Over time, real estate tends to go up in value, and over long stretches of time, real estate almost always goes up in value. That means you're not just making money today from rents, but your property is growing your wealth in the background. Now, another pro is tax benefits, right? Legitimate write-offs, right? Deductions on your mortgage interest that you pay, deductions on repairs, deductions on depreciation, insurance, whatever it may be, right? Understand what you're getting deductions on, have a good CPA on your team, but the list goes on and on for things that you can write off for tax advantages. Overall, Uncle Sam is a whole lot nicer to people that own buildings than most people realize. And then, of course, you got your leverage that you can use. This is another great thing about having some rental real estate in your portfolio. You've got leverage. In other words, you don't have to buy it all in cash to be able to use most of it as leverage if you want to go and buy another piece of property, right? You can control a $200,000 piece of rental property with $30,000 or $40,000 down, right? That's power, that's leverage. The other big pro about owning rental real estate that I think is important is the fact that it could be used in retirement. This monthly income is something that you can have in your retirement when you're done working. Maybe you want to have 3 or 4 rental properties that pay you $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month, right? Sort of like a self-built-in pension, right, that you give yourself. And ultimately, when you pass on, because we're all going to pass on at some point, you can pass these rental properties on to somebody else, creating a form of generational wealth, right? Not just advice, but actually that's tangible that you can give to the next person beyond you, right? And here's another very important pro that most people forget about. But when you own rental real estate, it's a hedge against inflation. Let me explain what I mean by a hedge against inflation. Because when prices go up all around us, inflation was high just a couple of years ago and still remains high in certain areas, right? Certain sectors and industries. But when inflation skyrockets and goes way up, guess what? So do your rents. What you rent the property out for is going to go up too. So it kind of protects you against inflation, because if all of a sudden inflation goes high, the property that you rent for $1,200 a month can now be rented for $1,400 a month. So you're the recipient of inflation as opposed to always being the victim of inflation as a consumer. On the ownership side, you get a chance to benefit when prices go up, right? Most people don't think about that. Is it good? Is it bad? We're not putting a moral clause on any of this. I'm just telling you the facts, right? The two properties that I owned back in 2005, they were renting out for $600 a month. 20 years later, they could rent out for $1,300, $1,400, $1,500 a month, because as inflation has gone up over the years, so has the prices for my rental properties. Now, there's always some issues and cons with this passive income that we call rental property, and I want to give you some of those too, because I don't want to make it seem like this is all pie in the sky. It's not. There's some things you got to think about before you get into this thing. The first thing you got to think about is it for you? Is it something that you want to do? Can you tolerate bad tenants? Can you tolerate dealing with people? Can you tolerate somebody potentially coming in and messing up your property and causing $10,000 worth of damage to your property? And even if you have a management company manage your property, you still got to deal with the issues, and ultimately you got to manage the property management company too. If you can't deal with that type of stuff, this ain't for you. This ain't for your portfolio, right? You can't deal with tenants, turnover, and toilets. This may not be something you want to do, right? Because even if you have a management company owning the property, you still got to deal with late rent, right? You still got to deal with people who think rent is optional. You still have to deal with a property management company that doesn't do what they're supposed to do based on the contract you have with them, right? All those things are part of the game. Screening properties, fixing stuff when it goes wrong, these headaches that you hear a lot of landlords talk about, you got to deal with it, right? Again, it's not passive at first. You got to put in the work until you get your systems and your processes in place and your team around you. That means putting in the work up front. It's nothing easy about it, right? And speaking of a management company, I always suggest that you manage your own properties at least for a year or two first. That way you understand and know what it costs to replace a door. You understand and know what the process looks like for actually bringing on a new tenant and checking credit and doing your screening of tenants that you need to learn how to do and know how to do. You need to know how much replacing that carpet or that flooring is going to cost in real life. See, the more you know about how to manage a piece of property on your own, the better you can go out and vet a management company to come in and manage your property. So in other words, you need to learn how to manage it before you can really properly hire the right property manager. So a good year or two of managing a piece of property yourself is going to give you some solid education towards hiring the right property manager. Another thing to think about that you need to know about is there's always going to be unexpected costs and unexpected repairs. You have to have some money when you invest in rental properties. Furnaces don't care that you don't have money. Water heaters don't care that you don't have money. Roofs, leaks in the basement, pipes, all these things, they don't care about whether you have money or not, don't have money. They're going to go out on you. You got to be ready and prepared. That means you got to build cash reserves that are beyond the money that you plan to put down on a piece of property. You got to build cash reserves or you're going to find yourself in a pickle. Bunch of repairs, no rents, and no money. That's how I lost a bunch of property. So I'm just telling you that up front. You gotta have some money if you want to play this game. It will save you in an emergency. And I guarantee you there will be emergencies when you own rental property. Then of course there's these market risk. Now, when I say market risk, I think about what happened, 15, 18 years ago, back in 2008 and 9 and 10. Those things happen. I lived through it. Property values can fall, especially when they've gone up so fast so soon in the last 5 years, like I explained. So these things can happen, especially in the short term, the 2 or 3 or 4 years or so. In that shorter time frame, you can get these decreases in property values. That's why you don't want to speculate if you plan to buy rental properties. You buy smart. And you buy for cash flow. And when I say buy for cash flow, I mean you want as much cash flow as possible. You don't want to make $100 a month on one property. If you make $100 a month on one property, that's $1,200 a year. You have one major repair. It wipes out all your profit for that year. You want to be making $300, $400, $500, $600, $700 a month or more on a piece of property. So you have some wiggle room and cash flow that's really cash flowing. Now, the other thing that you got to think about is time, stress, headaches. Real estate will challenge you mentally, but at the same time, it's going to grow you as well. And if it's done right, it can reward you too. But I just want you to understand that it's challenging. It's not easy. So why should you still do it? Because rental property, and when I say rental property, I'm talking about commercial, multifamily, single family, residential, all of it. It's going to pay you monthly. It's going to grow in value, typically over a long period of time. It's going to give you tax advantages, and it can be passed down to your kids, your grandkids in 30 and 40 years from now. Again, it's not for everybody, but if you're willing to learn and you're willing to fail forward and treat it like a real business, you can build real wealth from it. The kind of wealth that will outlive you, long outlive you. Look, here's the deal. I started with nothing. No knowledge, no money, and no roadmap. I figured it out. It took a while, lots of bumps and bruises along the way, heartache, pain, stress, headaches, but I figured it out. I made mistakes, right? But I did it one property at a time, and I plan to probably buy more rental property in the future. The kicker is, don't let fear stop you. Let your curiosity and your will to get it done drive you, just like it did me. Listen, if this video helped you in any way or gave you any type of inspiration or motivation to get it done or to do it or try it, make sure to smash that like button below and drop a comment below as well. What's your biggest fear about owning rental property? I want to know. Drop that in the comments below, and I'm going to respond to as many of those as I can. If you own rental property and you want to figure out what's the best way to pre-screen tenants, because tenants is probably the most important part of owning rental property ultimately. If you want to know how to pre-screen your tenants, check out the free guide below in the description box. It's free only for a limited time in the description box below this video. You got to click on that link to get it for free. Guys, this is about passive income and how I started buying rental properties with nothing. If you know anybody looking to get into real estate, share this video with them. Until the next video, peace.